was born Irid, and Irid begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. Lamech took unto him two wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. And Ada bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of such as handled the harp and the organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, and he was instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged 70-fold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. Pretty boring little passage of scripture, right? Well, let's look at a few things as we go through this passage. First of all, Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. And I just want to point out that that's his first mistake. Anytime someone goes out from the presence of the Lord, he's only going to fall further and further away. He went out from the presence of the Lord. And look, he says he knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and then he built a city, which was in rebellion to God, because God told him that he was to be a fugitive and a vagabond. He wasn't to take up residence. He wasn't to settle down. He was to be a stranger. So he built a city in rebellion towards God. But I want you to notice in verse 18, it says, Enoch was born Irid, and Irid begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methusael, and then Methusael begat Lamech. You see the El on the end of those two names? El is the word for God. And it appears from this that in the first couple generations that they still had a presence and a belief and maybe even some kind of worship system in place of God. But when you get down to Lamech, it says he had two wives. One's name was Ada and one's name was Zillah. Ada means pleasure, and Zillah means to hide. So you see that from the names, they're starting to fall away. They're going away from God to things that are pleasurable. And notice that Lamech had a couple sons. In verse 20, the first one was Jabal, and he was the father of such as dwell in tents and of such as have cattle. If you'll look back at verse 18 of chapter 3, God told them that they should eat the herb of the field. God didn't give them meat until after the flood. But it appears that Cain and his descendants started raising cattle in defiance to God because, to eat the herb of the field, first of all, because of the curse that the earth was under, and it was so severe at that point in time in history, it was very hard to come across food. Whereas cattle would have been a lot easier. They wouldn't have to depend on God like they would if they were farmers. So they started raising cattle. In verse 21 it says that his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of such that handle the harp and the organ. In verse 17 of chapter 3, the very last part, it says, In sorrow you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Well, what's the harp and the organ do? Plays music. Brings joy. Well, they're doing this in defiance to what God said about them being sorrowful.
Wow.
And in verse 23, it says, Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. Back in 3:19, says, in the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. The work was supposed to be toilsome, laborsome. But now they're trying to find a way to make it easier. So everything and that's where we're at in the world today. We're trying to make life wonderful here and now. You know, we're trying to make life pleasant now, instead of waiting and depending on God. And that's what this first civilization was doing. They were doing everything in defiance to God and what He had for mankind. As opposed to, if you go down to verse 25, it says, Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began man to call upon the name of the Lord. So Seth's descendants, they called upon the name of the Lord, waiting on God to bring rain, to bring a crop, to take care of their needs, as opposed to Cain and his descendants. They settled into the world and started trying to make life as easy as possible. I want to point out one more thing in Cain's descendants. Look at verse 22. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Why do you think God would have the writer include this sister of Tubal-Cain? Doesn't say she did anything. Just says the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah.
I don't know. What does the name mean?
The name means, I believe it means pleasant. The reason I believe God put that in here is to remind us that one day a Jewish king was going to take a Gentile bride. And let me show that to you. Turn to the book of 1 Kings. Chapter 4.
Chapter what?
Chapter 4. You know, Solomon has been referred to as the millennial man. In chapter 4 of 1 Kings verse 32 it says, he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. You know which one was the greatest of his songs? The Song of Solomon. That's the only one that I know of. Apparently there's 1,004 more, but one of them, God saw that it made it into the Holy Scriptures. Turn over to, I think it's in chapter 10, maybe chapter 11. Chapter 11. In verse 3, it says, he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, but his wives turned away his heart. So he had, between the wives and concubines, he had 1,000 of them. Can you name one of them? Turn to chapter 14. In verse 21. It says, Rehoboam the son of Solomon reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem.